Very good afternoon to all of you who are present here. Ma'am, I'm Safiya. I've been, in touch with you regarding this session. So it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Yaaminey Mubayi, for today's talk on a multidisciplinary approach to heritage conservation and management. So, Dr. Yaaminey Mubayi is a renowned educator and a researcher specializing in history, heritage, and community based policy planning. With over 25 years of impactful experience, she has worked with international organizations, government agencies, and private sector foundations to advance heritage conservation and management. Among her notable accomplishments is the successful nomination of the Thatheras of Jandiala Guru, Punjab, traditional metalworkers, to the UNESCO Intangible Heritage List. She has also played a pivotal role in the conservation management of many heritage sites, including the Red Fort as well as the Ellora Caves, and has contributed to crafting cultural heritage policies and sustainable tourism strategies in various parts of India. She's a Fulbright Nehru Fellow and widely published author. Dr. Yamine's interdisciplinary approach integrates history, sociology, architecture, and community engagement, making her an authority in the field. So today, we are very glad to have you here, ma'am, to share your invaluable insights into how this approach can shape the future of heritage conservation. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Safiya, for that really generous introduction. No, I'm not an authority at all. I think I still see myself as a student. I'm still learning, and I think that is the beautiful thing about this field, that we are learners right till the end.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy to be here among all of you today. Okay, can everyone see it? Can everyone
Yes,
see
we
it?
can see. We can see.
Okay, great. So let's move on. Sorry about that delay. Okay, so we were just on this question: why is a multidisciplinary approach to heritage conservation even necessary? Now, what does multidisciplinary mean? It means a combination of different disciplines, right? So you can have, of course, architecture, different varieties of architecture, landscape, design, etc., conservation. Then you can have archaeology, you can have, even just history, you can have sociology, anthropology. There are so many aspects to it, right? So different disciplines combine and converge to create a proper strategy to tackle a heritage conservation project. So the first reason is, of course, the complexity of heritage issues, right? When we look at the cultural significance of a heritage site, so you want to understand the historical, social, cultural importance of heritage sites. So therefore, you need expertise from historians, anthropologists, and cultural studies scholars, right? I mean, you need the different domain experts to come in with their expertise in order to just look at the significance of a site, which is of the significance covers multiple disciplines. Then frequently there are environmental threats, right? There's climate change, pollution, natural disasters. I mean, even with the Taj, I mean, a site as high profile as the Taj Mahal, we have seen, the Supreme Court stepping in to look at the impact of pollution and climate change, right? So therefore, you need the involvement of environmental scientists and engineers. One of my colleagues for long standing is Arun Menon, who's at the structural engineering department at IIT Madras. I mean, he's one of the busiest people in this circuit. I mean, I think he's worked on so many heritage sites in South Asia and beyond. Um, from the structural perspective. Then legal and ethical considerations, right? So there are so many issues such as ownership, repatriation of artifacts, rights of indigenous communities. Now, these require input from legal professionals and policymakers. Okay. Then we require holistic preservation. So, a multidisciplinary approach allows for comprehensive and holistic preservation that is not only centered on the material aspects of heritage but also its intangible values, such as its traditions, languages, cultural practices, because heritage is both intangible and tangible, and both need protection. And UNESCO has very much recognized that through the conventions of 2003 and 2005, the Convention on Intangible Heritage and the Convention on Cultural Diversity. UNESCO has very much acknowledged, and of course, there is a now a whole separate parallel trajectory of documenting intangible heritage. As we go further into our theme today, then I'll share with you some aspects of that that I've worked on. It also ensures that local communities are involved in the preservation process. Okay, because the local communities, a site should be preserved not only in a top-down manner, with just the laws and covenants and recommendations and rules of preservation, but it should also have it should be grounded in the aspirations of the local communities. That's very important. Then globalization has made the whole world smaller, actually. So it brings both opportunities and challenges for heritage conservation. One, in a slightly negative way, there is a tendency towards cultural homogenization. So the spread of culture, tourism, technology, it can threaten the uniqueness of heritage sites, right? Uh, Now, a multidisciplinary approach can help to balance these sort of homogenizing influences with the need to preserve local traditions and also with the uniqueness of local traditions. Then increase tourism. Now tourism can, especially in India, we tend to look at tourism as a ramban, a magic bullet that will support conservation processes financially, right? But tourism can also lead to a lot of detrimental impacts, crowding, overcrowding, pollution, degradation of the heritage fabric. So you need inputs from economists, planners, sociologists to manage these sort of challenges. Then you have global and local perspectives, right? I mean, a multidisciplinary approach can bring together global expertise and local knowledge. I mean, we've all seen in so many planning processes. I'll give you an example. When Indian Heritage Cities Network was working on the Bidar Karez, anyone remembers that project? Bidar, the water system, historic water system in Bidar. Anyway, there was a wonderful, we had people from the Institute of Water Resources, which is there in Iran, from Yazd. And we had a team from there working together, which came through the UNESCO office and, working with local organizations, including some local NGOs like Yuva and so on, to revive the historic water system. So international cooperation is can really benefit a lot of local sites. Apart from the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, I would say that international cooperation has worked very well in and not just at the policy level, but even working at the local grassroots level. But then local knowledge is equally important, right? Because local communities have a deep understanding of the heritage they are closest to. And in fact, as we go on further today, I'm going to share with you some experiences of how critical that local knowledge has been, for the in order to benefit the sites. Now, this is just a small sort of a activity for all of us. I'd just like to throw open this question to the audience today. What do you think was the most challenging aspect of the Chandni Chowk makeover in Delhi? Now, you know that recently, Chandni Chowk has been refurbished, and while a lot of people have a positive view of that, but many people also have a less positive view of that. But we have these before and after pictures. So, Chandni Chowk used to be immensely crowded, lot of traffic, not well managed, a lot of traffic from the delivery people who came, to deliver the goods that is stocked in the shops and so on. There were numerous public hearings, public consultations that were held. A lot of professionals worked, very hard on this project. And so now we have a sort of a refurbished Chandni Chowk area in Delhi. This is in Delhi, right? You can see in the second picture, you can see the Red Fort in the picture. Can everyone see this clearly? Yeah? Can everyone?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, all right. Would anybody like to just offer any ideas what to answers to this question? What was the most challenging? I mean, just look at the two pictures, if nothing else. What do you think was the most challenging aspect? From you are experienced in working on heritage conservation projects. Anybody? Yeah, Caroline. Can she, how can she answer? Can she answer?
Yeah, she can answer. She has to
Okay.
unmute.
Hello. Yes,
Yeah,
I think,
Caroline.
ma'am, just getting the communities on board, because there were
Yeah,
so many businessmen and then there were so many house owners and also people who lived on these streets. It was a home for so many people. I remember during our days in SPA and going on all these visits and scouring the place day and night. It was a home for so many
absolutely.
people, not just the building, but even the streets. People would bathe, eat, sleep, conduct business all in the same area. So I think
Yeah.
communities would have been the biggest challenge, not even the government.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's
And in fact, even I've held a public consultation in the town hall for this project years and years ago. And, there was literally a hand to hand fight between, different groups, interest groups within that area. So there were residential welfare associations and there were shop owners associations, and all of them literally came to blows. They were all stakeholders, they were all communities. I mean, people in the town hall were only those organized groups that could get into the town hall. I
yes.
personally had not even come into contact with the pavement sellers and the ready wale, the guys who stand with
Yes.
their,
There's a
yeah,
huge unorganized sector in this area. So
absolutely.
I think they were underrepresented maybe when taking those decisions or whatever.
Absolutely, exactly. So, they could have just been pretty much kicked out of the picture, right? I mean, we
Yes.
don't really see them here. So, what I'm saying is that in this whole process of beautification and so on, a lot of things go out of the window, right? I mean, the after all, the pavement dwellers and so on are also citizens of this country. But on the other hand, how do you balance the interests? Which interest is larger? the interests of generations of visitors to that area who want to have a reasonably decent experience of this walled city of Delhi, which is, we are trying to get them to have a good experience of the place. And in the picture on the left, it was a nightmare, and on the other hand, you often have to get rid of or evacuate or evict some people who are also, according to the constitution, have the same human rights as all of us, as anybody else or any other visitor to the place. So these are really hard choices to make. What I'm trying to say. It's not easy, and for those policymakers who are democratically elected, and or even the IAS officers and the service people who are in charge of these places, it's also very difficult for them, because after all, they have a whole constituency to cater to. So political, administrative, popular, economic, livelihood interests, I mean, they're just one layer upon layer upon layer. And decisions that are made are really not easy. They're not easy at all, especially in these large public spaces which belong to everybody, the so yeah, I mean, anyone else? Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Caroline. That's absolutely right. Anyone else have anything else to say about this? If you do, otherwise we can move on. Okay, we can move on. So let's just go a little more deeper into this whole aspect of communities, right? What are communities? Why are they important when studying cultural heritage? We sort of had a brief glimpse of that in that Chandni Chowk story, but let's just look at what the theory tells us. Cultural heritage has a big significance for local communities, right? I mean, after all, it is their what should one say? It is their identity, their ethos that literally feeds into making a site a cultural heritage, a significant cultural heritage site. So, heritage in community represents a bridge that links the past with the present and thereby creates a legacy for the future, right? I mean, if we look at right now, we have the Gandaki Bauli. I mean, I don't know. I've been working on these projects, so they're sort of right on the top of my head. The Gandaki Bauli in Mehroli, and also the Rajon Ki Bauli in Mehroli. They are twin Baulis of Mehroli. They are in the Mehroli Archaeological Park. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Delhi water heritage. But anyway, I'm just giving that example because I've just been working on that. So it's right at the top of my head. But when we went and we've interviewed some of the local communities and the people who live in the Mehroli colony, the settlement. And for them, the Bauli, the heritage is literally tied up with their memories of childhood. They're growing up. They said, they told us that, oh, we used to swim in the Bauli in the summer, and then and then there's all sorts of stories that come with it. So then sometimes someone drowned in the Bauli, and so that sort of becomes like it becomes like a local folk tale, literally, and everyone talks about it. And the Bauli then assumes it literally becomes an identity that is part of their lives. So that's why the next point is this link generates values like identity, tradition, the feeling of belonging, and which ultimately creates social cohesion in that community. So any heritage project, it's a no-brainer. Any heritage project should have people as its focus, because you need to study the community in order to understand how the cultural heritage, the roots go down into that whole infrastructure, as it were, on which the superstructure of the current community is built. This is particularly important for sustainability of initiatives, right? So now we come to a section on oral histories, because oral histories document community voices, right? Oral histories are basically, what is oral history? Oral history is verbal history, right? So it's a research method that involves recording and preserving the stories of people with personal experience of historical events. Can anyone think or remember any historical event? Anyone with a memory of any historical events that you might have? Can you anyone think of an example from the audience? Can anyone think of?
I think one of the oral histories, you mean? I
Yeah,
think one of the things we have is about freedom movement also. Like, for example,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
please go on.
So the case of that Jallianwala Bagh. So we have
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. People have had relatives or friends or family friends, or they have heard of somebody. People who live in Amritsar or anywhere in Punjab, they might have memories of people who were killed in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, right? What about partition?
yeah,
Partition, both
partition.
from, yeah. Anyone has
Yeah,
any knowledge of or any family links with partition?
not a
Yeah.
personal connection, but
Okay.
we've
Yeah.
heard. I mean, we had one professor, Anil Seth, who used to come and teach us. So he used to tell us about the stories because his family, during the time of partition, few of the
Yeah.
family members had gone to the Pakistan as well. So
Exactly. So I'm sitting here in front of you today, and I'm telling you personally that my family came from Lahore, and my father's family, and they crossed over the border on the 11th of August 1947, and they were lucky enough to have some relative who was in the police posted in Amritsar. So he sent a vehicle, he's a small bus. He said, just get into it, save your children, save your lives, and just move out from there. So that's how their lives were saved. Otherwise, I don't think they would have survived. So till she passed away in 2011, my grandmother still spoke of Lahore as her home. She said, "We are from Lahore," and towards the end of her life, when her mind was also wandering, she once or twice she sat up in her bed and she said, "Get my shoes. I want to go home." So I said, "But you are at home. Where do you want to go?" She says, "No, I have to go to Lahore. That's my home. Get my shoes. So this is how strong these memories are, right? I mean, it's a primary source of information that can include eyewitness accounts, folklore, songs, and community stories, like the one I'm telling you right now. It's from my own family. And oral history is important because it helps researchers understand the past and preserve memories that might otherwise be lost. Okay, that's why oral history is important, because otherwise, for professional historians, we reconstruct history from historical records, right? We look at gazetteers, we look at publications, we look at archival material, we look at papers, we look at reports, and we reconstruct. But it's the oral history that gives life to the past. And we're going to see it. I'm going to share with you a film that I had made on the Thatheras. This image is a picture of the Thatheras of Jandiala Guru, which is a small town near Amritsar. And we got them nominated onto the UNESCO Intangible Heritage List. And it took some time, it took 4 or 5 years for that nomination to come through. But finally, in 2014, they were finally listed on the UNESCO ICH list. So I think that was a very important milestone for craftspersons communities, because intangible heritage is not only about temples and ritual and music and dance and so on. It is also about craft. UNESCO recognizes craft as intangible heritage, not tangible. And so that's why craft communities, in order to prevent them from dying out, because traditional crafts are now increasingly threatened in India, because the younger generations don't really want to carry on their ancestral occupations. So here we see how this community was nominated and how that nomination really revived them, so that they're now alive and flourishing. So I think that was an important step. The recognition from UNESCO was a very important step in maintaining their craft. Here, this picture is a spectacular image of. Does anyone know what this is before I tell you?
This
Thank you. It's Puri Jagannath Rath Yatra in Puri. Okay. So, yeah, this is another place very close to my heart. My PhD was on Jagannath Temple in Puri. And recently we were documenting Rath Yatra, also trying to make a nomination dossier for the ICH listing of Rath Yatra. So oral history is a very valuable source of evidence also, especially when there is no other primary evidence available. So then it can provide an eyewitness perspective, and it can contextualize a person's experience and his or her experience of the whole place. Because, for example, in the Rath Yatra, there are some ceremonies which are done uh, behind closed doors. There are secret ceremonies which are done within the Jagannath temple, and then only the eyewitness accounts, which constitutes the oral history, that becomes very key. It becomes the most important thing, because there are no photographs or there are no other recordings of certain types of intangible practices, in which case the oral history becomes the eyewitness account. The oral history becomes a very important source of evidence. So as a subjective experience, the oral history it's very important to consider the dynamics of the interview and the relationship between culture and memory. Now, what does this mean? It means that how do you document oral history? You sit down, the historian will sit down with a community member and ask them some questions, or ask them to describe some memories of practices or descriptions of any kind of festivals, events, traditions, rituals. um, so it would also, the relationship between that person and the memory that they have of that practice, that would be a very key thing. So, for example, I have met people who have described the partition. For example, I'm coming back to the partition, India Pakistan memories here. There are some people who have very negative memories of partition. They have, because a very negative experience happened with their ancestors, their fathers, grandfathers, grandmothers, whatever. And whatever was the story's narrative that was handed down to them was underpinned with a lot of negativity. Okay, so they have a very negative experience of that whole process, and therefore they will have a negative attitude towards people involved. Right? I mean, it could mean Pakistan as a country. It could mean a particular community or whatever. They would could have that. On the other hand, I have also known people who have had a very positive experience. I mean, from within my own family, we have people who have said that, the local people in wherever they came from, Lahore, or is, they said they helped us, they saved our lives. They even, saved their possessions, and they said that we went back later and retrieved our possessions, and they were untouched. They just gave them back to us. So you can have multiple. You can have a negative or a positive experience, and most of that is subjectively handed down through the narrative that has come down to you. Okay, I'm just going a little deeper into this whole idea of oral history and oral evidence of oral narratives like this, because it's not often taught in most places, at least not to my knowledge. I don't know. I wonder if they do. I hope your teachers at your university are go a bit deeper into it. But these are the sort of aspects which you come up against when you're actually in the field doing the project, and then you have to very quickly create filters to understand what you are confronted with, and not become a victim to a subjective narrative. You need to often, look at that through the eyes of, maybe filter it through more neutral type of sources, uh, maybe through publications or books, or through narratives of other people, other communities, or counter narratives. Okay, I hope that's clear what I'm saying. Is Am I making sense?
Yes,
Neha?
ma'am.
Okay. Okay, great. um, Oral history is a way to preserve knowledge. It's an knowledge and understanding of earlier generations, older people, but it can also include the voices of younger generations. And now I'm moving closer to what I would like to share with you. Uh, I want to share this film with you. I hope we'll be able to see that, because I don't think I can email that to you. Anyway, we'll try and do it with my screen, whatever it is. You'll be able to see something. Another thing is, oral history is a way to challenge historical knowledge, also, to challenge it. Because it sometimes gives voices to people who otherwise there is no record of their perspective. Now I'm speaking as a historian. So when a lot of historians, well-known historians, Ranajit Guha and so on, they started the subaltern school of history in India. And subaltern means you look at history from below. So you look at it from the perspective of the dispossessed, the undervalued, the marginalized, the sidelined communities. So that was they would particularly write the history based on the voices of the underprivileged, and that is what, in a way, what I mean here. Oral history sometimes gives a voice to people who otherwise might be unheard, because typically what are evidence and records and so on, which are there in the top echelons of society, what we associate with high culture. It could be, everything from paintings to music to palaces to even battles that were fought. Well, they always name the dynasties that are fighting, or the kings and rulers, and the people with the possessions. But what about in a battle between, for example, the first Mughal emperor Babur and Sikandar Lodi, Ibrahim Lodi, sorry, the famous battle, first battle of Panipat. But what was the perspective of the ordinary foot soldier in that? Okay, so there would be no record. There would be no great court historian writing the history of the single soldier at the end. Whereas there'd be a lot of great Persian sources of history and so on that would have written about Babur, and that would have written about Ibrahim Lodi. So that is my point. So oral history gives us an opportunity to record the voices of the marginalized as well. Now let's look at communities from another perspective, that of stakeholders. For stakeholders means a stakeholder means somebody who has a stake in and since we work with heritage, so people who have a stake or a role to play in the heritage would be stakeholders, right? So in a democracy, first of all, I come from a generation where public funds should be used for public good, right? So, for example, when you have taxpayers' money that is being used for conservation of, nationally important, significant heritage sites, then the site should be open to the public. The public should benefit from that conservation, from that restoration process. And according to the constitution, we are all equals. There is liberty, there is equality, universal equality before law. So therefore everyone, a public site should be available and of use to the public. Okay, and social justice and equality must underlie public projects. So that is in our methodology that we follow in India. That is definitely one major rule of thumb. Now let's look at the types of stakeholders. So there are those whose lives and livelihoods are dependent on the site. Uh, I recognize primary stakeholders from that perspective. Definitely, owners of the site and so on are definitely primary stakeholders, but I look at those who for whatever reason are compelled to be squatters, even illegal settlers, those who are very vulnerable and whose lives and livelihoods depend on the site. Uh, those guys, for me, are very important primary stakeholders. And in any planning process, when you are making a plan for, um, uh, the reuse or whatever of a heritage site, it's very important to see the impact that your actions what is the impact happening on on those people whose lives are tied up and whose lives are vulnerable. If tomorrow that site were to disappear, what would happen to those people? Okay, and that includes, these small vendors, people selling little trinkets and small booklets and all that outside of heritage sites. I mean, what would happen to them if the site was to disappear or to close down, or they were to be evicted? Now, if they were just to be evicted, then what happens to them? What happens to their families? All those aspects are tied up with their work and their lives around a heritage site. Am I making myself clear? Is that clear? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
If you have any questions, please stop me and ask. Okay. So then there are also the secondary and tertiary stakeholders. Now, as we move from the primary stakeholders are the ones who are most closely tied with the site. As we move a little further away, we come to the secondary stakeholders, those who are accountable for the maintenance of the site. Now, these could be site owners and managers. So, ASI could also be a primary stakeholder. I'm not saying ASI wouldn't be, because ASI, is very, very closely tied up at a local level, is very closely tied in with the functioning of a site. So definitely ASI could be a primary, but they would also be secondary, and I would say they would also be tertiary stakeholders, because the Archaeological Survey of India and the state departments of archaeology, the state departments functioning at the state level, and Archaeological Survey of India, which functions from the local to the national and beyond, even to the at the global level. These are very important agencies, and they are very important stakeholders for the site. So they are in a class of their own, really. But for secondary stakeholders, municipal agencies, state government bodies, there are so many. You could have local police occupying, a heritage building which might have been an old town hall. Now it's a police station, or it could be an office for any other agency. So state government agencies often lodge their offices inside, old buildings. Um, then local market organizations are also important, because while at the primary level you have shops and vendors, but when they get into the position of becoming organized, and they have organizations, then those organizations would function as secondary stakeholders. Because on one hand, while they would determine policies that might impact the site, but they themselves may not be that impacted if the site was to change its profile. Do you get what I'm saying? While they may have attitudes and policies towards the site will not impact them to such an extent. Okay. And then, of course, you have local experts and professionals who are always important stakeholders. People who are local historians. I have come across a lot of people like that, local knowledgeable people who know a lot about, the site, from simply being having lived in that area. So they have personal experience of knowing, and then they are also interested in the history of that place. Many of them sometimes tend to be local school teachers, for example, in a small town. And I have come across many such school teachers who are immensely knowledgeable about the historical background, and even if their knowledge sometimes becomes a little bit like hyperbole, like, even if, what I mean is, even if they involve a little bit of mythology into their account of the local history and so on, but it's still very interesting to document what they have to say. And a lot of their tales and accounts and so on, I would urge you to sit down with people and just hear them out, because a lot of their stories will have kernels of truth which are overlaid by a little bit of mythology, maybe, I don't know, something to do with Ramayana, and something to do with Mahabharata, or something happened here, and the five Pandavas came and settled in these caves here and so on. I mean, they have those narratives, but there would be a kernel of some kind of factual aspect also to that. And then we have the tertiary stakeholders, who are basically policymakers, international multilaterals, ASI at the national level, UNESCO, ICOMOS, and so on. Okay. So any questions here, or shall I move on? Okay, I'll move on then. Okay, I have another activity for you. Which do you think is more important for the long-term sustainability of a heritage conservation initiative? Community involvement or legal protection? Everyone understand now what is meant by community involvement and legal protection? Okay, come on, guys. A little response.
I guess both are equally important, but since you mentioned long term, maybe legal
Yeah.
protection.
Okay. Okay. Uh, that's a great answer. Legal protection is very, very important. Infrastructure will not exist without the legal protection. Okay, so I'll leave this open. Safiya has put it in the chat, right, Safiya? You put it in the chat,
Yes.
no? So people can respond if anything comes to your mind. I didn't hear who was the person who said legal protection. Anyone?
Professor Sapna.
Ah, okay, okay. Thank you for that, Professor Sapna. Thanks a lot. Yeah, you do have a point. Look, there's no right or wrong answer for this. Okay, all answers will have their own justification. But I'd be interested to know what your perspective would be. So please follow up in the chat, and we can come back to it at the end, right?
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So now I'm going to. Uh, Okay, I'm just going into my case study, first case study, which is based on the nomination of the Thateras of Jandiala Guru on UNESCO's Intangible Heritage List. So, first of all, who are these Thateras? They are metal workers. They make vessels by hammering metal sheets into the required shapes. I'm sure that you must have seen these. I'm sure there are such communities in your hometown. I'm sure that in Mysore and so on, there would be settlements of these guys. Are there? Have you ever come across the metal workers?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, okay. So now these Thateras, I discovered them outside of Amritsar, about 16 kilometers outside Amritsar town. I was doing research for some other project. And then the local district industries center, they said that, oh, there's this community of craftsmen, metal craftsmen outside of Amritsar. So I just went there. But when I went there and saw them and saw their work and saw their settlement, I was amazed. I said, these guys really need to be on the UNESCO list. And then I asked requested the secretary culture, government of Punjab. They were at that point being this is a long time ago, 2010 or something, and they were being asked to submit applications for UNESCO ICH list. And I said, please submit one for the Tatera. So she said, Yamini, you make the thing, and we have no budget, so we can't pay you anything. So so I said, that's fine, not a problem. I was doing a lot of other work in the area anyway, but I somehow made this dossier. And as part of the dossier, is a small film, and that's what I want to share with you today. I really hope the screen will work. Okay. Anyway, let's just figure out who these guys. So the Thateras are a traditional community of metal workers from Jandiala Guru, Amritsar. They've been they manufacture utensils made of copper, brass, and kansa, which is bronze, right? And they were inscribed in 2014, and now that inscription process really helped to revive their craft. And it's not only on e-commerce platforms. This is also a outdated presentation, I think, or slide of mine. They now have shops, full shops in Chandigarh and in Delhi, and they sell under the name PTAL, Punjab Thathera Art Legacy, uh, which also is an acronym for Pital, Pital is the local Hindi Punjabi word for brass. So PTAL, Punjab Thathera Art Legacy, has shops now, and the craft is very much revived. It's running as a for-profit business. So I think it's a good thing that we got them nominated. Now, Jandiala Guru, here's a map, and there's Amritsar, and there's Jandiala. It's on the road to Jalandhar, which is basically the main National Highway 1. Now, this has been a manufacturing center for brass utensils since the time of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which is, 1815, 1820. It was Maharaja Ranjit Singh who settled communities of craftsmen, craftspersons around Amritsar. In order to also, provide support to the craft communities, but also in order to build up the profile of Amritsar as a major center for trade and manufacturing. Now, that was the first layer of history, okay, when they were settled here in Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time. Now, in 1947, the community of craftsmen that were living here in Jandiala Guru were Muslim craftsmen. And so when the partition riots broke out, then these Muslim craftsmen left or were evicted or whatever. They moved from across the border to Pakistan, and there were 400 Thathera families from a place called Gujranwala, which is now in Pakistan. Not to be confused with Gujranwala, okay? Not that. This was a small little town called Gujranwala. They told me that they said that be very clear that don't confuse it with Gujranwala. So I'm also clearly telling you. The Gujranwala Thatheras migrated to Jandiala, and the Jandiala Thatheras went off to Pakistan. Okay. Then, what is the manufacturing process which is still followed? So you have rolled plates of brass, copper, and kasa. Okay, those plates, small nuggets of metal are rolled into plates. Okay, there is a rolling mill which is there in the village right now, and the plates, these guys, the Thatheras, buy those plates from the rolling mill, and then they cut it and weld it together and hammer it in place. There's a scientific term, I think, for that process. Anyway, it escapes me right now. They rivet it and then hammer the rivets so that the joints are sealed, and they heat it in order to make the sealing process very effective. And that's how the utensils are made. And so pots are made like this. You can see in this photograph. Parat is a sort of a flat bottomed vessel. You'll see it in the film. Karahis in which you fry things. Parat is what you make dough in. You put wheat flour and water, and then you knead the dough in the parat. And kadai is a sort of a round bottomed dish which you put on the flame and you fry. You put oil in it and you fry stuff in the kadai, or make vegetables in the kadai, stir fry. Now they have a lot of ritual associations. The thing about these utensils is that they're not just utilitarian things. If you have a particular pot, you're not going to only use that for storing water or drinking water or storing something else and so on. If you have a parat, you're not only going to use it to make dough and then forget about it. these have a lot, these are associated with people's whole life and lifestyle and rituals and practices and times, important times, events in people's lives, like the birth of a child, like a wedding, like the passing away of a family member. Okay, so for example, the chaya patra is a small vessel in which they put a film of oil, and then when a young couple, married couple, right after their marriage, they put that chaya patra in front of them, and the couple sees their own reflection. They see themselves for the first time, because in India we had this custom of getting uh, other people getting you married, and you had never seen the person you were marrying. So in a chaya patra you would see the reflection, especially of the girl's face in northern India, because the girl's face is frequently covered up. And like that, you had when a child was born, the child would be passed through, would be put into a karhai or something like that for a little while, and then the father would pick up the child. God knows why. I mean, the father hadn't picked up the baby until the baby had sat in the karhai. It was supposed to benefit the family and benefit the person and the child and whatever. So there are a number of associations like that, which are also part of the, what should one say, the anthropological significance of the of the of the utensil, of the product. By the way, are we moving? Are we moving the? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
Can you see the slide? Yeah.
Yeah, I can see the slide. Um, Yeah, so now there are a lot of problems with the there were, or rather, a lot of problems. There was lack of organization, there was recognition as heritage, there was open competition, raw material, there was an unsympathetic tax regime, the VAT tax was, they were not able to pay. So, these were all problems that were being faced by the Tateras, but a large number of those problems have now been sorted out. So one can, therefore, one can say that it's actually benefited the community to have them inscribed on the UNESCO list. Next slide, please. Uh, yeah, so as part of the nomination process, the organization was revived to give voice, uh, and NGOs came in, stepped up for hand holding the association and so on, and that really helped to benefit this whole Pital and this PTAL initiative was all because of that, those NGOs coming in at that important point. Then the paradigm shift that happened was that the UNESCO nomination gave importance to the process as well as the product. Okay, this is actually a very deep infrastructural shift, because until then the poor things, they were not regarding their product as as a heritage product. They were simply regarding it as they had to compete with all the modern utensils, prestige pressure cookers and so on. They were actually trying to compete with that, and that was not getting them anywhere. And that's why they were dying out. But when this important shift takes place, when you look at the process as a heritage process which has value, then you realize that your product is something else. Your product is not just a run of the mill pressure cooker and buttons that are sold in the market. Your product is the result of a historic process, and your product is a piece of heritage. So that's why it's really important. So this was an integrated strategy that revived the Tateras, which comprised conservation, a lot of work. The settlement was also worked on, sewerage, sanitation, conservation also of some old buildings took place, thanks to the state tourism department. Then training was given, then outreach, marketing, tourism took it upon themselves to put Jandiala Guru on their tourist maps. So then people would come and, they would come to the settlement, they would buy, and so on. So there was a lot of, marketing outreach activities that took place that helped to revive the Tateras. And then, of course, showcasing also took place through tourism, through the UNESCO ICH listing. E-commerce platforms took off first, and finally the PTAL shops became popular. And I'm just moving, please move to the next slide. See how nicely the shops are displaying the products. So it's really a very good, it's a great initiative that took place with the revival of these arts.
Is the screen visible to everybody? Yeah.
Yeah.
सब कुछ आएगा सब रमान ना कटे रमाड़े मेरा नाम राजकुमार है जी पिछले पाकिस्तान चो आए गुजरावाल तो आए सानू अभी 47 तो बाद 48 जी बस्ती है 48 जी असी इतनी इंडस्ट्री शुरू की ये जंडियाला बहुत वड्डी बनी है इतने 4 रोल मिलें चलती हैं हूँ इतने 1 रोल मिले रह गई पित्तल का काम बहुत ज़्यादा घट गया है सानू अगे गौरमेंट कोटा देंदी थी कारतूस का तांबे का अं इंपोर्ट करते थे बाहरों सानू बनानी बदल वाले बंबे तो लैके दिंदे पर बनानी बदल वाले को तांबा लैके आते कॉपर मिलता बहुत सस्ता सानू रियाद होंगी असी चंगी तरक्की की इंडस्ट्री में हौली हौली वक्त बदलता गया तो स्टील शुरू हो गई स्टील के नाल ये जी मंडी बर्बाद होनी चली गई पित्तल का काम बहुत घट गया हूँ हौली हौली थोड़े चेर बाद 4 रोलिंग मिलें जो 1 रोलिंग मिल रह गई वो भी कदी कदी चलती है उस तो बाद इतने जो सिल्वर का काम है वो शुरू हो गया थोड़ा जहा सिल्वर भी चलन लग पाया बाकी जी पित्तल हैगी है अखबार भी पढ़ी दा कई डॉक्टर का लिखा भी होंगे कि जी पित्तल खाना बहुत वधिया पर हूँ लोग जो पित्तल नहीं खाते कोई कली तो भजते हैं कली करानी पैंती है दोबारा करानी पैंती है लोग सिल्वर के भांडे के दवा दा सब्जी बन जाती है कुकर बन गए ये टाइम लगता है उसके बाद
सफेद होता है उससे साफ करेंगे, इसका मालिक और इसका रंग बदल जाए। और ले आओ वो ले आओ तो ये ना तो पूरा किचन दे आओ तो बनाइए ना
निशानी करता उंगली ਨਾਲ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਧੋ ਦੇਣਾ उंगली ਨਾਲ ਪਾਣੀ ਕੱਢ ਲੈਣਾ
बोलो बोलो भाई
आप बता रहे थे ना कोई कई
अदा करता पहला अपने इतने काम करते थे आप बना रहे ठीक है कुछ प्रॉब्लम आ रही है
इसमें ये मधु परखा होता है
इसमें फिर जो एक ये छन्ना वो भारी वाला है
हाँ।
इसमें जो सुरमा पीसने वाले हैं ना
हाँ।
वो इसमें सुरमा पीसते हैं ये सुरमा ठंडा होता है
ये घंटा मंगल में बजाते हैं।
ये जब आरती होती है इसको विजय घंट बोला जाता है क्योंकि ये आरती 2 टाइम होती है
इसको क्या कहेंगे
विजय घंट वो आरती के टाइम पे इसकी धुनी बाज होती है ये किसी के बच्चा हो या कोई पूजा लगी हो उसमें काम करते हैं जो हिंदू समाज में जो लड़की की शादी होती है लड़के की उसमें लावा के बाद इसके मुंह में तेल देखते हैं ये चीज बनती है
मुंह में तेल
ये
जगन्नाथपुरी
कितनी उम्र थी
कितने साल कुछ वाले आए हो
20 साल 18-20 साल के थे अच्छा और वहाँ पे आपका कैसा था मतलब गांव था क्या था टाउन था
नहीं गुजरावाला खान
शहर था
गुजरावाला शहर
अच्छा फैमिलीज कोई लोग कह रहे थे 400 फैमिलीज आई है वहाँ से
यही काम करते हैं
यही काम करते थे आप भी करते थे तो पहले कैसे करते थे मतलब तब तो बिजली वगैरह नहीं थी
पहले हम नहीं करते
हाथ से जो जब अभी ये जो
जब पाकिस्तान बना तो सारे बटाला छियापुर और जनवरी और कुछ धीरे धीरे फगवाड़े का टोटल खत्म हो फिर बटाला पीतल का ढाल बनता था, पीतल के बर्तन काफी, वो भी अब टोटल ही 4 मशीन थी, 4। उसके बाद शाहपुर भी हम धीरे धीरे वो भी पाते, फगवाड़ा भी पाते। अब एक सिर्फ जंडेला गुरु में ही बर्तन बनते हैं, जो ठठियार बटाला में तो कोई कुछ काम करने लग गया, कोई कुछ करने लग गया, इसी तरह सब काम छोड़ गया। इसी तरह शाहपुर अब यहाँ भी 50% आदमी काम छोड़ दिया। कोई कुछ करने लगा, कोई सकड़ियाप का काम करने लगा। जब हिंदुस्तान पाकिस्तान बना तो हमारे यहाँ रिलेटिव थे, वो यहीं रहते थे, उन्होंने कहा इधर आ जाओ। देखो देखिए सारे ही आ गए, सारे आ गए, इसी काम करते थे। पहले पाकिस्तान गुजरा वाले भी तो यही काम करते थे।
उस समय सरकार ने कुछ
जी
सरकार ने कुछ सहूलत दी।
हाँ, सरकार ने उस वक्त बहुत सहूलत दी। इंडस्ट्री के लिए कोला मिलता था, रॉ मटीरियल मिलता था। उसके बाद दिल्ली समाज के इंडस्ट्री कॉरपोरेशन वालों ने भी माल देना चालू किया, पंजाब स्टेट इंडस्ट्री कॉरपोरेशन ने भी माल दिया। धीरे धीरे सब ने प्योर 100% तांबा
साफ है भी, साफ कट दे यार।
Okay, thank you. Now, the good news is that the craft of the Thatheras is not dying. This was the situation in 2010, 2009-10 when we recorded this. But the point is, it's not dying anymore. It's very much been revived. So that also explains the power of, getting international recognition or even national recognition, I would say. Today, we live in the age of social media. There are so many crafts which can, be revived. So many practices, cultural practices that can be revived in this way. Through word of mouth and spreading the news and the knowledge about.
I hope you can see the screen now.
Yeah. Can you move to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Okay, so this is about historic water management at Ellora, Khuldabad and Daulatabad. Very much a multidisciplinary approach. Involving, obviously landscape to a large extent, but also getting in a lot of very important aspects of heritage, because the area, as you are well aware, is deeply historical and full of very, very important, significant heritage sites, such as the Ellora group of caves, Daulatabad Fort, and the historic town of Khuldabad, which, as you know, is a roza. Those of you who have studied Sufi towns, the roza is always, the political capital is always built in the shadow of the roza, which is the domain of the Pir, the saint, the Sufi saint, right? All of you are familiar with that? Okay, fine. Thank you. Got it. Can we move on, please? Next slide. Yeah, so we will be looking at something called Malik Ambar's pipeline. Let me explain what I mean by this term, because this term also I have not created. It was literally given to me by local circumstances and local communities. So Malik Ambar, if any of you remember your medieval history, Malik Ambar was part of a large group of people from East Africa who came into India from 15th, 16th, 17th centuries onwards. And Malik Ambar was one of those. They were usually sold as slaves by Arab slave traders, and the Deccan Sultanates. Remember the 5 sultanates of the Deccan when the Bahmani kingdom was broke up? after the war with Vijayanagara and the Bahmanis. So there were the five Deccan Sultanates, right? There was the Nizam Shahis of Ahmednagar, the Adil Shahis of Bijapur, the Qutub Shahis of Golconda, and what was the Bidar and one more, Birar, Imad Shahis and one more. Anyway, so I'm a useless historian. I can't remember these just when I need to. So Malik Ambar was literally was bought by the rulers of the Nizam Shahis of Ahmednagar, where and he literally acquired. He became a great warrior general. Also, he was bought by the prime minister of that state, and he also became a great general in the army, but he also became a great strategic politician and literally became the ruler of the Nizam Shahi state. And his seat, his capital was Daulatabad Fort and not the Ahmednagar Fort. So it's a very interesting time of history when the Africans they grew from being slaves, but they were not slaves as in, people who poor exploited people who, you order around. These people were powerful, huge, highly trained, some of them were gunners, some of them were great horsemen. So they were highly trained and very, very elite group of people. They were not at all, dominated and exploited and so on. Now, Malik Ambar spent a large part of his life at Daulatabad, and one of the things which he set up was an elaborate system of water management, which provided water to Daulatabad Fort. Now, here we have this image of Malik Ambar. It's a painting. It's part of a larger painting. Malik Ambar literally kept the Mughals out of the Deccan. Politically, it was only after he passed away that the Mughals were able to enter the Deccan. Until then, they were not able, or at least at Daulatabad. They had come up to Burhanpur, but Daulatabad was beyond them, and the Deccan and South India, so obviously Daulatabad was the gate to the Deccan. And while Malik Ambar was there, he did not allow the Mughals to cross. So the next slide, please. Here we are going to basically talk about how Malik Ambar understood the terrain and topography of the Deccan, and that is really important. Looking at the landscape, even as when you are doing a conservation project, it's very important to study the landscape and to figure out how, particularly because water management has been a very major aspect of how societies have survived and how settlements have survived, and not only survived but thrived everywhere, from the great cities of Agra and Delhi, the Mughal cities, and others as well, to the great forts of Rajasthan and the Deccan and Maharashtra and so on. Everywhere, and of course further south, everywhere it is very important to conserve and manage water, because that is what you need. That is your essential resource. And when forts were besieged by armies, and they would run out of food grain, but it was only when they ran out of water resources that the forts they would finally cave in, they would give in. Okay, so here we have the typical topography of the Deccan. Now look at that. You have flat tabletop plateaus, right? The Deccan is a plateau. So you have flat-topped terrain and a sharp slope, which is also called a scarp or escarpment. So you have a sharp slope, and at the base of that, water gathers, because all water comes through rainfall. You don't have perennial rivers there. Like the Godavari is much further south, right? I mean, here you don't have any perennial rivers. You only have seasonal streams that come alive. And so water is collected usually at the base of the slopes and man-made. If you look at this picture also, you have a very straight edge of the bund. These are man-made bund walls of water which collects naturally when the slope allows the runoff to be collected there. Next, please. Yeah, so these are the seasonal streams that come alive usually during monsoon. But remember the monsoon that comes to the area of Ellora and Daulatabad, which is in the district of Aurangabad. It's on the leeward side of the Western Ghats. So the monsoon winds hit the Western Ghats and cause a huge amount of rain on the windward side, which is towards the coastal plains, Pune and so on. And then when it crosses over, the winds come, they're much drier. So it's much less rainfall that comes, which is why the water has to be carefully conserved and managed in this area. Water conservation and management is an essential part of heritage conservation. I'm just saying that, take it from me in writing. Next, please. Next, please. Okay, so this is just a glimpse of Ellora caves. The Ellora caves were built from the 6th to the 12th centuries. And they are a spectacular example of cave architecture. They mark the pinnacle of cave architecture in India, and there are 34 caves, of which right in the middle, number 16 is the famous Kailas temple. I don't have an image here, but it's very well known, so I don't need to share that. Next, please. There are Buddhist, Jain, and Brahmanical caves here. Now, what is really important to us is that every cave has a major water cistern adjacent to it within the cave structure. So we're talking about 6th century onwards. They are making the caves, they are carving beautifully and all that, but they are making the water cisterns. That means, and all these water cisterns are filled by rainwater harvesting. Okay, so when I started working here as part of the ASI project, ASI and CRCI project to make the site management plan for Ellora Caves, what struck me about this place was the presence of amazing water management. The image on the left is an underground cistern. So see how the water has eaten away and eroded the rock. I have other better photographs. I mean, when they're bigger, you can see it better. But this is how the water would travel inside the rock. The rock type also matters. This is Deccan basalt, and the basalt has a lot of air vessels. It's like a sponge, the rock, because it's volcanic rock, right? The Deccan is covered by volcanic rock. And this is the basalt part of the Deccan. And this dark gray basalt stone is like a sponge. It absorbs water, and the water then moves around inside through the various air holes. Next, please. Okay, so my story begins from here. This is the Mausala Talab, which is in Sulibhanjan in Khuldabad. You can see the backdrop of the Deccan. The Talab is very ancient, from the time of the Yadavas, which is like 12th century. The steps of the Talab are made from the time of the Yadavas. But successive dynasties, after the Yadavas came multiple other, including the Tughlaqs, the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, and then the Bahmanis, then the Nizam Shahis, and so on and so forth. But these water bodies were conserved by all. They were used by all. There were some slight modifications made, but I will show you, go through the process and show you how the water cistern was set up during the time of Malik Ambar, and how he transported water from this Mausala Talab to Daulatabad fort overland, okay, through a system of channels and various types of channels, including ceramic channels, including overland streams, including waterfalls. He transported it through a dike, covering a period, a distance of about 2 kilometers. So from Mausala to Daulatabad Fort, this is about 2 kilometers away from Daulatabad Fort. And this whole system was shown, displayed to me by a member of the local community, a local farmer, because he could see that I was just standing there and looking helplessly. And this gentleman then so kindly gave his time and showed us the entire system, which I'm going to now show you. Yes, Satish has raised his hand. Yes, Satish. Satish, you have a question? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. Satish, we have given you the permission. You can accept it, and if you have any question, you can ask that.
Okay, so I press open queue, is it? Yeah. Okay, yeah, Satish. What do I do?
I think maybe it was a mistake or something. So maybe we can
Okay.
move forward with the
Okay,
presentation.
let's continue. Let us
Yeah.
continue. Okay, so can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, now look at the steps. These are Yadava period steps, but sluice holes were made, and there is a channel that runs under the steps. So they would have stone or wooden posts to block these holes. When they're blocked, the water is inside the talab. When you want to release the water and make it flow out over the embankment under the steps, you open those, you lift up those posts, and the water flows through a channel and goes out over the embankment, right? So this is how they would allow the water to move out of the talab. So this is the talab water now, how it is moving out from under the steps through a channel and then moving into some other types of channels on the other side. Next, please. Right. Now, this entire orchard was, and till today, we sat under the trees, and there were mango, jamun, guava, and a lot of local fruit trees that were planted. Now, this, just look at the beauty of it. First of all, the idea of planting an orchard, it's the best way to maintain and sustain a water system. Now, this entire dike, if you look at it, it has walls. I mean, it has these hills on either side, and it's a long space. This is the way this dike runs from Mausala to Daulatabad. Okay, and this, just as an interesting aside, this tree on the left that we have, this banyan tree, the local people call it the Dargah of Jalali Baba. So it's not just a tree for them, it is a dargah, it's a sacred shrine of a Sufi saint. And, and the idea of having the dargah there means that Baba protects the water system also. So just look at the way, I mean, we talk about our legal protection and this and that, but look at the way they would have protection in earlier times. Next, please. These are some of the ceramic pipes. You find a lot of these scattered in the thing. They're not now all broken. And frankly, this also was several years ago, because now the ASI just hasn't got around to protecting it. I got it nominated on the World Monuments Fund watch, WMF watch, but ASI hasn't got around to doing anything here. So, I mean, if your college wants to ever make a trip, then I would suggest make a trip to get Malik Ambar's pipeline in Daulatabad. So this is the way, these are a lot of these kind of pipes. They were embedded in the walls on the sides of the stone in stone embankments made in the side of those hill walls. Next, please. This is a waterfall, and it's literally a man-made waterfall that contributes to a stream that runs along the side. And the water, as you can see, is drinking it, was completely clean. There's a well on top of the hillside, and from that well also supplements it. So it's a question of, risk mitigation. So in the summer, when the water levels would fall everywhere, maybe the talab levels would also fall, but there would still be the well, and you can still draw out some water from this. Okay, next, please. Now, these were a system of cascading lakes. Now, actually, a lot of there were 3 lakes cascading one into the other. And you can see that the straight, where you have the straight wall, that's a stone wall, man-made. At the corner, yeah, that one. It's a straight stone wall that leads into another lake, and that leads into a third lake. And this is how the water would be transported, and it would reach the Nagar Talab, which is the outermost reservoir for servicing Daulatabad Fort. The civic establishment, people, as well as animals. Next, please. Yeah, and now we come to an end of it. These are members of the local community. This gentleman on the left, he is the farmer who literally showed me Malik Ambar's pipeline. These were his words. He said, "What are you looking for?" So I was saying, "Oh, there's some old historic structures." He says, "You are looking for Malik Ambar's pipeline, isn't it?" So I said, "Yes, but how do you know Malik Ambar?" He says, Malik Ambar was our local hero. He is from here. And he then proceeded to tell me so much about Daulatabad history, about Malik Ambar, about the water pipeline. But the sad thing is that, 5-6 years later, when I went back and tried to find him, I realized that he had passed away. I was told that he had passed away. So this is how oral history is very vulnerable, or oral history is very, very fragile. So please be careful while documenting it, but it's very valuable. So communities are our major source of oral histories. As soon as we lose community members, we lose an entire ecosystem. We lose an entire knowledge system. So I think that's it, right? There's last slide would be just. So this brings me to an end of my presentation, and if there are any questions.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Not at all. Pleasure.
Very deep learnings were presented. Both the cases showed us. Very interesting. So I have a small question where, I think there are formal ways of, like we say, protocols of documenting physical heritage and, physical documentation. But when it comes to oral history, we all talk about it. But is there any reference or any kind of protocol, any kind of framework that you use to document oral histories?
So I would say that's a really good question. Thank you for raising that. And ideally, I should have put in a slide about these protocols. As such, with protocols and so on, it's not like someone tells you or teaches you that sort of thing. These are things you learn along the way. But also one should follow the law of the land and so on about what is the correct way to follow these kind of protocols. So look at oral histories as a piece of intellectual property that you are handling. Okay, so if you look at IPR norms, number one, you should have the permission of the person whose work you are recording, right? You should request their permission. If you are recording them physically, even on your phone, if you're video recording, please ask their permission, and if possible, have their permission either verbally or write it, get them to sign off on anything. Like when we have questionnaires. So when we circulate the questionnaires, we typically, ask people to sign off on the questionnaire. Okay, so these kind of protocol, the idea being that you're not, stealthily or, in some underhand way extracting information from people without their consent, without their knowledge, and also how you're going to use that information, you need to be able to explain. So a lot of young filmmakers nowadays, when they literally ask their participants, documentaries and so on, when they're making, they literally ask the participants to sign a sort of a non-disclosure agreement. A small, it's nothing much. It's not a huge legal document. It'll just have 3-4 lines in which you simply say that, look, this work will be used maybe not for commercial purposes, and it will not be broadcast in any unreliable platforms and so on. Because nowadays, especially even earlier, we used to take permission for sure, but like in the case of the Tateras, that film that was made, their permission was taken all the way. Otherwise, they would not have even talked to us, I think, to this sort of extent. And then they also have an angle, right? They want to get a certain point of view across to the world, to the international community. So we need to take their permission. That also is a somewhat negotiated process. So yeah, this was a very good question to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I have a question. Like in the course of presentation, you have mentioned about oral history being very subjective in nature, and a lot of times there are a lot of mythologies also which comes in, because then when you're actually researching on a certain thing, you have also mentioned that we have to look at other sources of information as well.
Yeah.
But when you don't have any other source of
Yeah.
information and you're only depending on the oral history, how do we actually objectively look at it as a researcher? Because so how do we actually negotiate with that objectivity and subjectivity in that?
It's tough. It's tough, and you need uh, good scholars or good even good historians working with you, because I've realized out of while I'm I mean, I have a lot of problems with people in my discipline, in the discipline of history. But one thing, I must say, that history gives you, historical training gives you that ability to, make local with global linkages, systemic linkages across time and across space. So, for example, when we are suppose we are looking at, I don't know, you're in Mysore, right? So suppose we are looking at any cities in a larger particular region. So then we will have to, if we are looking at a community in that particular town, we would need to look at larger regional historical trends. What was happening? Suppose we are looking at a community of craftsmen living in Mysore town right now. In order to understand their history, we would need to go back maybe 2 centuries, 2.5 centuries, look at 18th century. What is happening there at that time? What is the state formation that is taking place? Who are the rulers? Who is ruling? What are the processes? What are the bureaucracies? All that one gets from looking at wider history of that particular region, and then that you can superimpose. Okay, within this larger context, what is happening to this town and what is happening to this community which lives in this town? I'll give you the example of Jandiala. Jandiala also, there was no historical background when I first said about it, other than the gazetteer. District gazetteers are usually very good sources of information, but very limited sources of information. They're colonial products, right? So we have to read them as colonial history. Colonial And that's what a good historian can do for you. The good historian will say, okay, here's the gazetteer, it has huge amount of information, but remember that information is aimed, was collected for a particular purpose, so that the colonial rulers could rule better. Okay, now we have to see that if the gazetteer is giving a particular perspective of a community, of a region, of, they would be doing it because it would somehow benefit them, or rather the colonial rulers. So like that, you have to balance. So then I said, okay, Jandiala, this is what I was getting, the family is moving across the border, this, that, and the other. What was going on in the macro space at that time? What are the political trends? What are the administrative trends? Whatever is happening at that time? And then you take your chances. Sometimes you come to a point when you cannot get information, you have to depend on the oral history, but always try to have a, I mean, someone saying Pandavas came and lived here, and then from here they moved. Oh, Lord Ram and his brother and sister, brother and wife came and lived here. So there would be a reason for that narrative. What could be the reason? Okay, so all these things you have to figure out and take, and keep a good historian on your team, I would say.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. We have a question in the chat by architect Madhu Votri. She's asking, what are the rights of the stakeholders slash property owner in case of storytelling?
In case of storytelling,
Yeah.
what are the rights? What do you mean by, I don't understand the question. Stakeholders, property owners.
Yeah. Ma'am, Madhu Votri, can you please ask the question, like what
Yeah,
exactly?
please.
Yeah. She has, we have given you the rights to unmute yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon,
Yeah,
Yamini ji. Good question.
yeah.
The question is basically like, what happens if the storyteller is telling the right story and the person who's recording or writing or publishing goes in the wrong direction? Then what are the rights of the person who told the right story?
A person who told the right story, but the professional, whoever it is, the architect or some
Hmm.
historian or someone, prefers to take that into the wrong direction,
Hmm.
then there would be a reason for that, right? I mean, why would they take it? Either they misunderstand.
They misunderstand. Or
They mis-
sometime we have also seen that, there are the other type of professional who do it for their own benefits.
right, right.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's not much I can advise on that. We ideally, most of our work is premised on the fact that the team has no ulterior motive.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
The motives of the team, our professional team of professionals, uh, they are beyond reproach in terms of they don't have ulterior motives. If they have an ulterior motive, then it's very difficult to. Then you have to, people will have to contest that development, whatever
Hmm.
it is.
Yes.
Then you'll have to, then it will become a legal matter. Then the local people will have to go to the court and say we didn't do this, we didn't want
Hmm.
this. So but there's I mean, the ideally, so which is why, I suppose the whoever's telling the story should tell the story with as much as much honesty and clarity. More than
Mhm.
honesty is the
Mhm.
wrong word.
Mhm.
As much
Yeah.
clarity as possible, so
Yeah.
that your words will not be misrepresented.
Mhm.
But we live in a world today where so many things can happen. I mean, your words can just be garbled or edited in such a way.
Yeah.
If it's a recorded interview, then it can be edited in all
Hmm.
kinds of
True.
ways.
True. Yeah.
So, which is
Yeah.
why maybe then we should stick to written accounts,
Hmm.
write it down, and then sign it with the
Yeah.
signature.
Right.
That might be a better, that you have to see, talk to your team, and you have to see who's doing the research.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you very much.
And I would also like to add a few points here, where the ethics comes into
Right.
the picture. So we have these consent forms and declaration, because we also declare that whatever, like ma'am said in the previous question where we were talking about the protocol.
Yeah,
So as a researcher, we have that ethical this thing obligation to be
yes,
true to whatever you have said and you have mentioned
absolutely.
to stakeholders. So I think that
Absolutely. That goes without saying. I mean, that in the world, especially when there is visual evidence being recorded, apart from textual or written evidence, you have to have consent forms. There's no question about it.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think if any of you have any further questions, you can actually text. So we'll probably uh, with
No,
this we'll.
it's not a question.
Yeah.
Not a question, ma'am. You mentioned about community engagement and legal protection. And you also mentioned there's no right and wrong kind of a thing for between both of this. This is just a recent experience. We did a exhibition at the archaeology department in Mysore, the state archaeology and heritage and museum department. So now they were talking about their experience. They are doing couple of projects in North Karnataka. The commissioner, when he went to those villages, they're so ignorant, the village dwellers. They were using all these the stones and the pillars which are like are everywhere in the entire village, is being used as maybe washing stone or something like that. So I think one is building up this awareness becomes very very important. And at the same times, once that engagement is there, and policy also will sort of like has to go hand in hand. Now this is more not a question, rather just an
Absolutely.
information.
But be careful that sometimes we find that in the process of building awareness, uh, it should be neutral awareness, right? Not that otherwise you'll find that people who are using the stones and so on for washing clothes, tomorrow they'll discover some kind of temple or something under that, and that then it will come out under somebody's house, and these stones will be scattered all over. There's such a lot of political politicization of these matters, but it's okay. I think there are bigger and bigger challenges and newer challenges that come up all the time that we have to deal with. I think yes, building awareness is a very important thing. It's just that sometimes it should not be that, oh, every all kinds of awareness opens the door to commercialization or has creates an over commercial attitude. I think awareness building, when it teaches us to appreciate our heritage and our identity, I think that is the best, that's the ideal. When you realize that, wow, this is really an amazing historical or a piece of heritage that is part of my whole identity, my childhood, that I have been seeing since my childhood, and that awareness comes, that's ideal. But when beyond that you say, no, now this I'm going to fight with somebody about whose heritage is it, my heritage, your heritage, then that just become that, not the idea of heritage conservation, for me at least.
I believe that's not the only problem. Finally, you started selling things from a network, and the new party comes in picture,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
finally it's
I
a
agree.
destruction of heritage.
I agree. I agree, and that with intangible heritage, which is more fragile and more, it's intangible after all, And so even then, I had a great fear when we were doing this, with the Tateras also, that they will lose the authenticity of their process, and suppose they start manufacturing everything mechanically, then where will that the authenticity of the product be? UNESCO also has a lot of debates on that issue. So, I mean, life goes on, these debates will also go on. We'll try to figure out as we go forward.
All right. Champa ma'am, are you saying something?
No, no. I think the dialogue can go on and on. You know,
Yeah.
I have so many things to even share or put the question. I think the time is clicking also. I think I'm sure we will look forward to have you here also someday in Mysore. You know,
That'll be
it was
lovely.
lovely, and especially about the oral history, because at Mysore School of Architecture every year we go for documentation. It could be a
Okay.
temple or it could be a village and things like that. So, you know,
Excellent.
this oral history, not all of us are conservation architects, rather, we come with different specialization. So, we
Wonderful.
wouldn't have learnt it as a core, but we are learning from our own young colleagues also, and with people like you people. Okay, so this
Thank
was
you.
the idea of inviting you, ma'am, for this particular FDP, and we make it a point during the semester break. You know, we as faculty also need something challenging or motivation, you could say it.
Right. Right.
So every time we try and do some hands on and some online sessions or in person sessions and things like that. So this particular thing, yours is the first in the series. So
Okay.
thank you very much, and you have really given us so much of insight into smaller aspects. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
And thanks to all the participants. There were about 36 to 38 people, ma'am. This is just for your information, from ranging from professional to our own alumni to students to outside college, like, you know, many professors and things like that.
Lovely. Thank you.
So
That's
thanks
wonderful.
to all of them also for taking part in the session.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank,
ma'am. Thank you very much. It
thanks a
was
lot,
really
Malini. All the best. All the best to all of you. And thank you for having me.
thank you very much. See you. See you all participants.